This is Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley. To paraphrase and slightly twist the words of Taylor Swift, why aren't we exhausted by rooting for the anti-hero? We live in an attention economy. That's a cliche at this point. But if you're online ever, you've probably seen an increase recently in jokes posted about bad people, sometimes rooting for bad people. Consider George Santos and Gypsy-Rose Blanchard, two people who have been shunned by society in different ways, punishing them for undeniable misdeeds and then rewarded in other ways. These people are raking in money on social media. They're being invited on talk shows. They're being called icons, and they're the butt of a lot of jokes. But at what point is that the same kind of reward as all that other stuff?
A lot of the times the answer is it's funny because Republicans like George Santos are so dumb and it doesn't matter. And then Trump becomes president again. And it's like, wait, oops, I didn't mean that.
Rachel Greenspan joins us once again to argue for discretion in memeing. Stay with us.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Welcome back to Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley.
In the words of Lady Gaga, you live for the applause. Are you like Tinkerbell? If we stopped clapping, would you disappear?
No.
You wouldn't.
No.
What could we do to get you to go away?
Stop inviting me to your gigs.
The lesson is to stop inviting you places.
But you can't, because people want the content.
That was a clip of an interview between former Congressman George Santos and internet comedian Z-Way. And look, we can't actually say it any better than George Santos did. People on both sides of the aisle would probably love it if George Santos disappeared. But as long as people can't look away from the dumpster fire that is his political career, he will continue to remain in the public eye. And there's another topical example of this phenomenon. Gypsy-Rose Blanchard, the famous victim of Munchausen by proxy, who helped murder her abusive mother, Dee Dee, in 2015. Gypsy-Rose was released on parole a few weeks ago and has rocketed to social media fame in that time. She's got 9.3 million followers on TikTok, another 8.3 million on Insta. And like George Santos, she's being called iconic, often by young social media users who probably don't remember the classic icons like Jackie Kennedy and Audrey Hepburn. There is a legitimate question here. This isn't just about memes, but there's a question about whether it's healthy for society to be drawn to, even obsessed by stories about problematic public figures. Think about all the people watching O.J. Simpson speed down the highway in that white Ford Bronco. When are the jokes, the inevitable jokes, about not great people funny? And when is it unethical to post yet another, or even dangerous to post yet another meme about George Santos? We are joined once again by Rachel Greenspan. She's a writer and a social strategist, and now among the elite number of repeat guests to Hear Me Out. Welcome back.
Woo, great to be here again. Thank you, Celeste.
So I'll let you articulate your opinion yourself. What's your message here?
Truly, my message here is that it's concerning, I would say, that as a culture, as an increasingly online culture in particular, we're so quick to laugh at public figures with kind of questionable ethical experiences who are in the public eye for all kinds of reasons. Of course, you know, Gypsy-Rose Blanchard is very, very different figure, a very different set of lived experiences from George Santos. We're talking about them for different reasons, but they're both pointing to this trend of us just kind of not taking people seriously in a way. And I think, again, very different examples. So they're kind of indicative of different elements of why that is dangerous. But I think, especially it being an election year, in terms of George Santos becoming this meme, this kind of figure who's called an icon, who's called a king, who's called a queen, who is laughed at by both the right and the left, isn't really sitting right in a year where we have a former president running for office again this year who is known for also saying and doing kind of funny, absurd things in the public eye. And we know how that's gone in the past for us as a country. So it concerns me that yet again, we're kind of looking at this figure, in the case of George Santos, who's a Republican who has been very clear on his views as a lawmaker, separate from his ethical problems that led to him being expelled from Congress altogether on December 1st, to look at that kind of figure who, spoke at the day of Trump's encouragements on January 6th ahead of the insurrection, who was supporting calls for questioning the validity of the election. Why are we not taking seriously that that's a person that, isn't just supposed to be funny?
Okay, so I mean, I feel like there is probably something here that we agree on, but the part I agree on, maybe, I'm just going to guess, is coming from the other direction. In other words, I think about things like Harry and Meghan's interview in which they were talking about racism within the royal family, and that immediately became an internet meme and joke. And to me, that's concerning, that we rush to turn things into clickable content that will, get us more followers or whatever, make us go viral, so that we're diminishing actually big problems. Does that sort of jibe with what you're saying here?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's definitely similar. I mean, for sure, it's in this same vein of we are not taking things very seriously in our public discourse for the most part, period. So I think it definitely applies there. I think what might be a difference, though, is in terms of, for example, like clips that went viral from the Oprah interview, like Oprah saying, "Were you silent or were you silenced?" That's like a big meme since people are laughing at that being a funny, repeatable line. However, nobody is laughing at the fact that Meghan Markle experienced racist abuse in the royal family. For the most part, the public discourse is on the side of Meghan and Harry standing out against the royal family and all that stands for, and finding moments of levity throughout and finding those kinds of meme moments therein. So I do think there's a little bit of a difference in kind of that situation versus a George Santos where we're going, that's hilarious that guy is saying that stuff and that guy is doing those things that are bad, that I don't like, that I don't agree with, but that's funny. So no one's saying it's funny that the royal family is racist. You know what I mean? So I think that's where I feel like the distinction lies. Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that we are not discriminating in who we allow to become internet celebrities. I mean, that we should be more discriminating, that truly awful people should not go viral, shouldn't have millions and millions of TikTok followers. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not necessarily saying that because I think there's no way to kind of litigate that. If Hitler were alive, we'd all follow him on Twitter. You know, we all keep up with what bad public figures are saying and doing, and for a reason, right? Like that's a regular part of the mainstream media.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I don't necessarily think it's it's an issue of attention. I think it's an issue of the kind of tenor and tone of that discourse. So for example, when, ahead of the Z-Way interview with George Santos, people were clamoring for that. There were tons of posts saying, "Oh, we need to get him in the room with Z-Way. That's going to be hilarious." And in the end, as we heard at the top of this episode, he kind of won in that conversation in a way, because in all of those major clips that have gone viral from the interview, it was George Santos acknowledging that, yeah, sorry if you keep talking about me, if you keep inviting me on, I'll keep being here. And I think it was a really telling point that, yes, we're going to keep watching, we're going to keep paying attention, but also now we're not concerned about that fact. We're still saying, oh, but haha, we just want to laugh. I think something interesting that I'm curious your thoughts on, Celeste, the fact of George Santos being a gay man in this role in, his very short term as a Republican lawmaker and being this kind of, yassified figure, to use a term that E.J. Dixon at Rolling Stone referenced him as in a recent story. That's not really sitting right with me.
Sorry, just for our listeners, I want to make sure they understand that a yassification is like giving someone a internet Photoshop makeover, a glow up, one might say, if you've watched that Netflix thing. You're making them look really good by using picture, video changes.
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
and I would say too, on just to further in the way of yassifying, so to speak, someone, there is definitely an element of kind of like a queer sensibility around that idea. It's definitely something that comes
definitely
right, and so it's like coming from the queer community is a lot of what that kind of meme joke is. And so it's being in this context used as for someone who is a gay man, George Santos, who has, there a lot of virality around images of him in drag, to then give this kind of treatment of almost not taking him seriously because of those elements is what it almost suggests to me. And that's, I don't know, I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
I mean, I definitely think that appropriation of gay culture, which is rampant. Justification is not just the only thing, but we are seeing that everywhere, that the internet has made it possible for all kinds of people to pick up on language and cultural artifacts, one might say, that belong to certain communities, that were created by certain communities, mostly as a form of their own identity, and sometimes for protection, so that they could talk about things without people understanding entirely what they're saying. And that's always dangerous, and it's always problematic when people do that. I think, though, that, George Santos lied about so many things, including his sexual identity, that when other members of the queer community have made fun of George Santos, I found that to be okay. But it sounds to me like you're saying even that, when even if it's a member of his own community that's making a meme out of him, then that is a sort of that we should be concerned when those things go viral. I wonder if what you're talking about is similar to, do you remember when Jimmy Fallon had Donald Trump on his show? This would have been back in 2016. And he ruffled Donald Trump's hair. Right. It became really infamous.
Because people weren't really taking Trump seriously yet.
It was just part of this joke.
Exactly.
And then everyone said, see, look, this was this example of how dangerous this was. Is that what you're saying, that by treating people who are possibly a danger to society as jokes, it means we don't take them seriously?
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. I think really a challenge in Trump discourse has been that he is an entertainer first, and he is funny. He says things that are often comedic and make people laugh, even people who don't agree with him and think he is heinous and don't want him in office. There's still tons of clips of Trump saying, quote unquote funny things on the campaign trail that still today go viral on leftist social circles. And so I think even still, we're not really taking him seriously in the way of, I think if we do let ourselves laugh too much, how can we also hold sight of the fact that this is a person who led to an insurrection on the U.S. Capitol? It's kind of like it almost such a tight line to walk that I think people are so struggling with it and so quick to just go to the easy kind of light laughing element. I think as another example too that I think of now is Lauren Boebert, the videos spreading of her being, groped in a theater when, she is a lawmaker who has said tons of, incendiary things around gay and trans folks in the U.S. and how they pose dangers to society in her view. And meanwhile, here she is out in public view, showing kind of the height of hypocrisy in that way.
We have to take a break in just a minute, but let me just say as a bit of a pushback, and I'll let you respond to this when we come back, that lots of things about Boebert go viral. She recently said she's concerned about the way that January 6th hostages are being treated, and that description of these criminals, those who are in jail have been convicted of crimes, serious crimes. Her description of them as hostages has absolutely sparked a lot of internet memes and discussion and op-eds, even among the conservative community. So to me, it feels like that, yes, people are watching that video of her being groped and basically behaving horribly in the theater, but they're also paying attention to what she says. Now, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that, but we have to take a break first. I will be back in just a moment. This is Hear Me Out, a podcast from Slate. Stay with us.
Hey, this is Mary Harris, host of Slate's daily news podcast, What Next? Slate's mission has always been to cut through the noise, boldly and provocatively. This election season and Supreme Court term are no different. Important coverage like this, though, it would not be possible without the support of our Slate Plus members. So, I'm going to invite you to join us with a special offer. You can try your first 3 months for only $15. That is $5 a month for your first 3 months of uninterrupted ad-free listening on every Slate podcast, member-exclusive episodes and segments of your favorite shows like Amicus and the Political Gabfest, and unlimited reading on the Slate site. Best of all, you'll be supporting all of Slate's independent journalism and analysis as we make sense of the news like no one else can. Sign up for Slate Plus at slate.com/podcastsplus. Again, that is 3 months for only $15. So sign up now at slate.com/podcastplus.
And we're back. I'm Celeste Headley. This is Hear Me Out, a podcast from Slate where we disagree without arguing. And what we're talking about today is whether or not we make fun of things too quickly, and that ends up being a problem when we should have taken them seriously instead of laughing. I hope I've described that well. We have Rachel Greenspan with us, writer, social strategist, making that point. And before the break, I mentioned that I thought people paid attention to both the ludicrous behavior of Lauren Boebert and the concerning things that she says. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good point, which, to be clear, all of Celeste's points are great. That's why we discuss without arguing. But I think what it comes down to, I guess, really then is kind of more on a person-to-person basis, and it's a moment for reflection. I think a lot of folks seem to choose to only care about some of these lawmakers when it is that kind of silly, ha-ha, laughing at you kind of way, and then ignore a lot of the more concerning political elements. And I think that to a degree, not to always bring it back to January 6th, but I do think most of the country was shocked by January 6th. Most people didn't think that was actually possible and didn't expect that folks were genuinely feeling those feelings because people weren't kind of taking seriously the radicalization of the right wing. And people, I think a lot of the time, I think people who are more to the left, who are more kind of considering themselves maybe even outside of the political sphere, and they're just kind of, voting Democrat and tweeting and whatever. They're not like super, super actively engaged in following what's going on in Washington. Not to say that there's something, inherently wrong with that. To each their own. We all have our own values and priorities. But I think I would urge people to kind of check themselves on, am I laughing at this Republican lawmaker who's doing this bad thing, and I'm not actually feeling emboldened and encouraged and inspired to understand that perhaps this suggests something deeply scary and dangerous about our country moving forward? Not to say that everyone needs to be terrified and upset all the time either. That's why I think it is like,
You say this, so this is where I have to push back a little bit, Rachel, because look, I'm a journalist. I have to read all this stuff all the time. But I also have developed a relatively thick skin to it where it doesn't affect me emotionally. I don't think the majority of the country has that kind of thick skin.
Absolutely.
And the outrage cycle can be exhausting. And so I think that for many people, young people today, I'm Gen X, but people younger than boomers especially are more politically active than they have been for decades. And so that leads me to believe that people are paying attention. But at the same time, what's wrong with coping, the coping strategy of being able to laugh about the things that might otherwise scare you to death? What's wrong with that?
No, you're right. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with, coping in that way. And of course, also to be clear, I myself will admit right here, I have laughed at many a meme of George Santos, for example, right? Like I'm not immune to this either. I think it's something that we're all experiencing in the culture, right? And I'm just a member of that culture too. So I just, again, totally agree. I think, we can't expect people to be engaged in the 24/7 outrage cycle that is our political discourse of the United States in this era. But I do think still there has to still be that fine line of, are we treating this as entirely a joke, or are we holding those two truths at once? I think another good example is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, especially in the beginning of her term, said such bizarre things that were very easy to laugh at, like Jews have laser beams from space, whatever, some such she had said at the time. But a lot of people were just kind of like, that stuff is crazy. She's crazy. And I think when we're so quick to say, like, to view things that way, we're kind of discounting the fact of how many people do see the world on her side of things. And so again, it's not to say that we need to be so like devastated, and I'm not encouraging anyone to like make themselves feel worse about the state of things all the time. I think it's just like sometimes things are so wild and so devastating that we have no choice but to make light of it. And definitely that's where our internet culture has moved towards, clearly. So again, not to say that everyone at large doesn't see that. I think it's just a matter of us all needing to like hold those two truths at once.
So I want to be clear for those so that everyone can keep up with us. In 2018, Marjorie Taylor Greene spouted a conspiracy theory that the wildfires that were at that point raging were possibly because of lasers, space lasers.
Which is funny. It's funny to say that.
It is funny and it's stupid. Okay, but the thing for me is like, you also mention this phenomenon also trickling into non-political spaces, and you also think that's a problem. And Gypsy-Rose Blanchard was an example of that. And so again, this is a still very young woman who was imprisoned because she abetted in the murder of her mother and was just released on parole, and she has become an obsession for a lot of people. Society, right or wrong, gets obsessed with a lot of problematic people. I mean, we seem to have in the United States at least, an unending thirst for media and content about serial killers. So how is this different from that?
Absolutely. No, I mean, and I would...
I'm not comparing Gypsy-Rose Blanchard to a serial killer. I'm just saying. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, it seems that this is part of that larger conversation of, why do we have so many Jeffrey Dahmer series, and why do we need to watch all of these TikTok videos about this? I think the Gypsy-Rose story definitely has, significant strength from the true crime obsession, right? Like that zeitgeist around, a murder, but a murder that everyone feels comfortable saying isn't quote unquote that bad, in the sense that people know that she killed her own mother out of, as was argued in court, essentially self-defense. And to be clear, she did not personally murder her mother. She was imprisoned for second-degree murder. Her then partner carried out the act. But I think
There's a great HBO documentary that came out in, I think, 2017 about it. It was called Mommy, Dead, and Dearest, in case any listeners want to see the backstory on this. But go ahead.
Yeah, and then there's also a fictionalization of the story that was a limited series on, I believe, Hulu. I think it was actually called The Act. And then now there's a new Lifetime series or two-part, I think, limited series about Gypsy-Rose's time in prison. And so part of why we're seeing so much of her, too, is because she's been on this press tour to promote her Lifetime series, which I think just at least the first part of it's already been released as of our recording this conversation. But I think, first of all, yes, of course, our culture loves true crime, loves, you can't get enough of these stories. But I think also it's still this element of that's almost like an anti-hero in a way for us to root for. And the discourse around Gypsy-Rose as, you know, this kind of anti-hero icon, you know, whatever terms people are using for her, that a lot of the language is the same language that's used to describe someone like George Santos. And I think part of it, you know, Celeste, you mentioned this earlier, part of it is a mass appropriation of queer culture and language across, you know, Twitter and TikTok in particular.
Yeah, and African-American culture
Exactly.
as well. Yep. I wonder if you would agree then. I read an article in researching for this interview. I read this article in which they quoted Claudia Villarreal. She's at FanMade. And she said something interesting. She said there's a huge difference between a social media influencer saying, buy this product, and Gypsy. She doesn't need to be selling anything to have her audience care about her. Being herself is going to be the sell. And I wonder if that distinction is important to you. The distinction between somebody who is gaining followers because of who they are and the person that they are is problematic or appropriating, and those who are straight up capitalists that are like, I'm beautiful and thin and I'm going to make money by modeling the clothes that I get for free. Is there a difference?
I do not believe that there's a difference. I think that's an interesting take. She's for sure going to make money from this. I mean, attention, we're in an attention economy, of course. Like being a social media star can lead to huge financial success. She'll get $1 million for one TikTok about a product easily in the near future. And I'm not, you know, criticizing that. I'm not saying that, you know, folks should not get the money that our capitalist society is willing to give them for enacting those goods and services. But I don't necessarily think that there's a big difference. I think, yes, she has a very charismatic personality for sure. Like she's Gypsy-Rose and like does great in interviews. She makes fun, kind of very intimate feeling TikTok content. So people have kind of more of an easy parasocial attachment to her. And I think the same is true for George Santos. He's great on camera. He makes money from making cameos for people. I'm sure Gypsy-Rose will do the same. People want to hear from the people that they like, that they enjoy and they like listening to. The reason that influencers exist, the reason that we have such a major influencer economy now is because of the personalities. And I think there are a lot of, you know, influencers with concerning personality. A lot of folks who encourage the insurrection are major influencers with hundreds of thousands and, you know, millions of followers and so on and so forth. But no, so I don't really see it that way, that there's such a big difference in, you know, her now role versus anyone else who's a quote unquote influencer.
I mean, so people are going to make memes of people when they do funny stuff, whether it's the Michael Jordan crying meme that will not go away, or there's been a ton of memes about Tom Hanks. There's been a ton of memes about the Kardashians, right? Ironically, them also crying. But who makes that distinction between the people who are not serious enough and therefore it's okay to meme them and those people who are perhaps a danger to society, and we should hesitate before memeing them? Like all the memes that make fun of Justin Bieber, for example, or the memes that made fun of that Chinese spy balloon. Is that too serious an issue for us to make fun of?
I will say, in terms of meme creation and virality, I think our culture has spoken. It is clear nothing is off limits for meming. to a certain degree. I think whatever someone's view is, they will create a meme that is reflective of that. That's kind of like the way that we communicate now. And so I don't think that there's any use kind of like policing that in a way. But I think the way that we talk about these people, which, memes are one part of that. It's like, part of our language now on the whole is what is kind of needs to be considered. So I don't necessarily think it's like, as easy as if I were to say like memes about this type of person are bad, memes about this are fine. I'm not trying to, make that case.
Okay, so we need to take another break. There's still more, I still have a couple more questions for you as I try to wrap my head around a concept I never took seriously until you brought it up. The dangers of memeing people who are a danger to society, a possible danger to society. We are talking with Rachel Greenspan, and I'm Celeste Headley. We'll be back in just a moment on Hear Me Out. And we're back. I'm Celeste Headley. With me is Rachel Greenspan talking about the dangers of memeing people. I'm going to say that rather than the ossification. This is Hear Me Out. And we have just a few minutes left, and I want to kind of dig into this idea of when it's okay to meme and when it isn't. And I wonder what you think of the idea that making fun of people for most of history has helped to defang them. In other words, until Trump, when you had somebody wearing a ludicrously overly large helmet in a tank, they lost the presidential election. When you had people made fun of all kinds of presidential figures, and oftentimes that was the downfall of their campaign when they became an object of ridicule. And I can imagine people saying, hold on, these memes, that's what these memes are doing. They are designed to make these people an object of ridicule and make it impossible to take them seriously. Now, I want to leave Trump out of this because he seems to be an exception to so many different rules. But what do you make of that idea?
I think the big distinction there, it's that ridicule layer that you mentioned. I think, agree, we can leave Trump off of it for now. I think George Santos, there's a huge degree to which he is not quite being ridiculed. He's being kind of more celebrated in the way that we're discussing him as a figure. And I think that's where it gets tough. I think, of course, also, so many discussions around stand-up comedy in our world right now. And, what's okay to joke about, what's not okay to joke about. And, so many comics will go, I'm allowed to say whatever I want, actually. And Ricky Gervais just won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy Special. And in that special, he made fun of people who didn't like what he had said and said, haha, guess what? I still can say, whatever I want. Sure, you can say whatever you want. We live in a country with free speech. So yes, legally, Ricky Gervais, you can say whatever you want, but that doesn't mean people will like whatever you say. And I think it's all about who in truth is the object of that ridicule. I think in terms of like looking deeper in that stand-up comedy example, there are tons of trans stand-up comics who do, amazing sets around the trans experience. And they make jokes about trans people and trans culture because they're not punching down. They're part of that culture. They're laughing with their community. When Dave Chappelle makes jokes about trans people, he is ridiculing folks who are undeserving of that ridicule.
So, and in the way that this connects to what we were talking about before is you're talking about when clips of those specials then go viral. Because people do take clips and turn them into internet posts on TikTok, on Insta, and they do go viral. So you'll see that joke that Dave Chappelle made again and again and again and again. Is that where this connects?
Yes, in a way. And then also the concept of being funny and the attempt of being funny is so ingrained in the user experience of showing up on social media now. And so logging on, a huge goal for many users across platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, even Facebook still, you want to be quote unquote funny. There is a layer of that. And so looking at even in the industry of professional comedians whose job it is, they're having this same kind of conversation around what's okay to laugh at versus what's not. And I think for me, the same rules apply to existing as a regular, user on social media, where sure, if you want to try and be funny about something that is upsetting or something that is bad or dangerous or whatever, you're not allowed to try and, create levity and humor around that. It's all about, again, who and what and how is the ridicule coming through.
I mean, first of all, I'll say that the vast majority of people aren't funny.
They want
most
to be,
of us
though.
are not funny. Yes, everybody wants to be funny, but most people are not funny on the reg, right? Most people can say something funny every once in a while, but if they try to be funny, most people aren't. That's why, it's hard to be a stand-up comedian. I will say that. And I also say that some of the quote unquote jokes people post on social media that they defend by saying it was just a joke don't qualify because they weren't funny. I don't know if that means I'm agreeing with you or not, but I will say that many of these so-called funny memes aren't funny at all to me. They don't have comedic value. On the other hand, I get what you're saying, that we should, like, if I was a societal critic, and you're a social strategist, so it makes sense that you would be concerned about this. But as me, who's just like every once in a while skimming through my Instagram feed, I'm not sure how on the ground concerned I should be, I myself don't repost those. So is there something else I should be doing, do you think, as just a regular consumer of social media? Am I supposed to be doing something else? Am I supposed to be telling people not to post those things?
No, that's a great question. I don't think there's necessarily any onus on you in this scenario to take any particular action beyond just kind of, reflecting internally at times. I will say I do this when I have laughed at a George Santos meme. And again, like you said, I'm a social strategist. I am a writer who writes about internet culture. Like this is my thing that I think about all the time. So of course I'm going to think about it more than the average person. But it is worth it to check in with yourself and go, is this funny because, and finish the sentence. Like, why do I find this funny? Why do I find this entertaining? And I think if everyone did that, we'd have a lot easier conversations around politics, around comedy. I think there are a lot of professional comedians who aren't actually asking the question of, why is this funny? Because a lot of the times the answer is it's funny because I'm, making fun of a person or a group who's undeserving of that ridicule. Or it's funny because, Republicans like George Santos are so, stupid anyway that I'm going to just laugh at them because they're just so dumb and it doesn't matter. And then Trump becomes president again. And it's like, wait, oops, I didn't mean that.
Yeah. I mean, it's still okay for me to post the DJ Khaled dancing.
Always.
Right? I mean, that's okay. It's still okay for me to post the TSA employee skit.
Everything's okay.
But I see. Everything's okay. All right. Well, I mean, you've given me something. I got to be honest. You've given me a lot to think about. And these are things I really hadn't considered. And, in a way, that's kind of your job, right? Is to make us think about these things more intentionally instead of just consuming social media like we consume popcorn in a movie theater mindlessly. Is that
exactly
fair?
Exactly. Which I love consuming popcorn mindlessly in the theater as well. So I get it.
I do. So this was a concept I hadn't really thought about before Rachel Greenspan brought it to us. And I wonder what you think. Have you considered this before? Do you agree with Rachel? Or do you think we should stop navel gazing and just let jokes be jokes? Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, but we want to hear your thoughts. You can email us, hearmeout@slate.com. Now, last week we had Frank Buckley on, giving a defense of Trump voters. And I know we say sometimes that we get a lot of mail on topics, which is true, but we were basically buried. If emails were physical, we would have been having trouble reaching the door. We were buried in mail about that conversation. And we are so glad that you all took the time to write in. And believe me, we read every email. The emails we got represented a huge diversity of viewpoints on the topic, but we want to share just one of those viewpoints. This is a note we got from a listener named Chad. Chad says, "Hi, Slate team. I really wanted to take something valuable away from this podcast, but the way things got tense felt unproductive and honestly made me not want to engage with Trump or conservative-leaning voters. So ultimately, I don't feel like the podcast achieved its goal and maybe should have been labeled differently. I understand the challenge presented is difficult and maybe the guest is to blame for the way he engaged with the host, but nonetheless, I was disappointed. Anyway, hoping 2024 doesn't get too crazy, but I'm hoping I don't have to turn away from all political podcasts." So, Chad, let me just respond from my own, Celeste's point of view, and say that the point of this podcast is to show that we can disagree, sometimes in ways that are difficult and tense, and walk away not having diminished the other person's humanity. I want to be able to disagree with someone without dehumanizing them. And in that sense, I feel like that conversation was successful. I always want to demonstrate how you can do that. I mean, Frank Buckley and I were never going to agree. That's kind of the point of the show. He comes on the show. He is considered. I mean, believe me, I'm a journalist. I speak to all kinds of people from all over the spectrum. Many right-wing pundits especially are not reasonable because I have to fact check them constantly. And that's true of people on the left wing as well, but even more so, especially lately, on the conservative side. Frank is one of the more reasonable ones, but we were never going to agree. And sometimes that's tense. And I hope you don't turn away from all political podcasts. I hope you find the ones that are still based in facts and evidence and are still civil and allow you to hear reasonable people sharing their views. That's what I hope, Chad. Anyway, we always love to hear your thoughts. It is hearmeout@slate.com. Hear Me Out is a podcast from Slate. The show is produced by the very reasonable Maura Currie. Ben Richmond is the sane Senior Director of Podcast Operations, and Alicia Montgomery is our wise VP of Slate Audio. I'm your host, Celeste Headley, and until next time, I hope you speak your mind, but keep it open.